Hello, darlings. And now, it's time for your favorite part of the show, our Stacking Benjamin's headlines.
Our piece today comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, and I thought this was appropriate with the Stacking Deeds podcast launching tomorrow. Where new landlords go wrong. This is a piece written by Chris Kornelis. And Chris writes, as questions about where interest rates and real estate prices are headed continue to weigh on the market, more people could be tempted to turn their homes into rental properties instead of selling them. But becoming a landlord isn't as straightforward as it might seem. In fact, it comes with far more financial, legal, emotional, and time-consuming factors than many rookies realize. Rents, for example, aren't surging the way they had been in recent years. Oh, my goodness, rents surging a ton, OG. The last couple of years up until just recently. But let's walk through some of these points that they make. OG, let's start with you. Treating it like a business. A lot of people that are brand new to being a landlord don't treat it like a business and get in trouble, this piece says.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it like it's just a little plaything, or this is my cottage that sometimes I rent out to other people on Airbnb or something like that. And when you do that, then you are much more loosey-goosey with the financials. You're loosey-goosey with all the other stuff that goes into renting properties. So if you're going to be a landlord, then be a landlord.
Alan, I know a lot of people who are going to be listening to our show, we're going to play it here on the Stacking Benjamin's feed as well tomorrow, are just dipping their foot in the real estate pool, so to speak. How do they begin treating it like a business? How do you kind of get that framework set up?
Yeah, I like to go in and budget if whether I'm going to rent out my own property or I inherited a property or buying a new property for a property manager. You can do it yourself, but as long as there's room in the budget and the numbers make sense for a property manager to take over, if it's overwhelming or you're not good at it, that's really going to set you up for success, because it's really tough if you don't have the skills to be a handyman. I know you can do it, but do you have 6 hours to do it and the time to go to Home Depot, take 8 trips to Home Depot because you don't have the right part, and, dealing with the tenants and not screening them properly and collecting the rent checks. It does take over your life and it becomes overwhelming, but just sort of, if you can start with a property manager taking over, wow, man, it'll feel like a mutual fund that's just passive.
Well, I totally agree with that. I don't think it's ever 100% passive, by the way, so I will argue with you on that one. But before you hire the property manager, does it make sense to maybe with your first house get your feet wet a little bit doing some of this stuff yourself, so that, because I know there's got to be some bad property managers out there, and it's difficult for a new person to know the difference between a good one and a bad one. Right.
Well, I guess you have to at least educate yourself, right? Like, why, because you own a house, does that make you an expert on screening tenants? Does that make you an expert on fixing toilets? Does that make you an expert on, finding how the best landscaper or pest control bill? Like, you have to start somewhere. So yes, I did it myself when I was in my 20s. I knew nothing. I figured it out. But if you're starting now, I talk to someone else who owns real estate property. I found other investors have been a lifeline. They love helping other investors succeed. They're happy to share their contractors and their lease templates and things like that. So don't do it alone. Just build a network and talk to a realtor, a property manager, a lender in your area. They're going to know who all the investors in town. And I found them very, very willing to meet you for lunch or coffee to help you through it.
Speaking of fixing toilets, Doug's become an expert at fixing our toilet here, OG. I mean, the number of times that dude has had to fix the toilet.
Its eyes are all big.
I thought he was talking to you, OG. I mean,
I was just
Doug's
commiserating with
like,
OG. We're like,
dude,
yeah,
we promised it would be quiet.
Yeah. I do like what Alan's saying, though, OG, about surrounding yourself with good people. You get into any market, you get into any investing opportunity that's not passive. Well, you got to surround yourself with the best people you can find.
Well, and of course, real estate investing isn't passive regardless. I mean, even if you have a property manager, you're kind of managing the property manager to some degree, but you're leveraging, that person's skill set and network, like you said, to hopefully speed that process up and make it a little bit less impactful to you, rather than trying to do all of it on your own. There's some value in trying to learn it too, I think, but know thyself. I know that I'm not a toilet cleaner. So,
yes, and I do love
unclogger.
Yeah, and I do love, Alan, what you're saying about, you could probably pick and choose those limited areas and not have to be an expert. And I think thinking you got to be an expert is what stops people from going into real estate. Second on this list is underestimating the cost, by the way. Another big mistake many first-timers make is underestimating the costs associated with rental properties and assuming they'll be bringing in more money than they actually do. Agree with that one, Alan?
Yeah, I think that's true. And you got to have healthy, conservative, budgets going in. Like, most people use 5% for a vacancy rate, meaning whatever their rental income for the year, 5% is just not going to come in because of vacancies, maybe 10% for repairs. You can be a little bit more conservative with those numbers. I think people really get in over their head on repairs because when you get a quote for a repair or a renovation, really that quote is best case scenario, right? It's, hey, this is going to cost $10,000 to redo your kitchen. That's a best case scenario situation, and very rarely does that happen. So I would always add 20% to any repair or renovation budget that's been given to you.
They've got an expert in this piece who says, for a rule of thumb, I think that landlords should be very, very uncomfortable if their cash reserve is anything less than about $15,000 on day one. What do you think of that number?
Honestly, it really depends on how many properties you have. I think that's great if you've got 1, 2, or 3. But back to the mutual fund analogy, it's actually less riskier and less painful when you have more properties because if one's down and one's vacant, the other ones are going to prop it up and carry it. Same sort of things happened. You might not get as much rent on one property, but you've got 4 other that are making a little bit more than you thought. So that it balances the boat and sort of reduces the risk. So it's sort of counterintuitive to think that more properties reduce risk, but that's how I approach it.
I want to end, Alan, with this idea further down the piece, lacking a consistent screening process. A lot of the experts in this piece talk about how they have a screening process, and yet then their tenant has a buddy who needs a place, so they decide to skip the screening process. Or I know my friend who just needs something for a little time, and they talk about that's when the mistakes really start to happen on this very expensive proposition.
Stories are the downfall of every landlord. I don't want to hear any story from any tenant. Like it's no one ever has a good story that says, hey, I got a bonus. I've got, people moving out. I'm going to stay here by myself, but let's keep the lease terms. Like every time someone has a story, it's not good news. But that's what's great about software, property management software that I never meet my tenants face to face. I don't have, there's no opportunity for stories. It's here's the lease, here's the terms. And it's very business-like, which is how you set up and run a business. And if you're going to rent from a big apartment complex or anything like that, no one's going to listen to your stories. So why, because you're a mom and pop, are you going to start listening to stories and bending the rules? So.
Oh, gee, did you have that with your properties? Did you start getting some sob stories from people?
Well, back to the property manager and trying to find, how do you know if you've got a good one? In the town that I had the rentals in, there were only 2. And the first one I figured out pretty quickly sucked. The second one was better, but it was more like a square root of sucking. So it was like doubly sucking, but it was somehow better, supposedly. I don't know. It just, so what was interesting was we would hear the stories from the property manager about the tenants or some issues or something like that. We had one particular issue where we had a water leak and we got it pretty quickly and fixed it and repaired it. And he was like, well, I'm not going to pay rent because you ruined one of my jackets. And that jacket was worth, oddly enough, exactly what rent was.
Wow. Imagine.
And yeah, exactly. And the property manager's like, well, he's not wrong. And I'm like, no, he's 100% wrong. Like, what would we, if the building burns down, do we replace everybody's stuff inside? No. That's what renter's insurance is for. It's in the lease that you're required to have renter's insurance. File a claim with your renter's insurance. I am sorry that happened. We don't intend for you to, be displaced for any length of time or whatever, but you can't just arbitrarily discount your rent by some number because a coat got some water on it and it wasn't supposed to. And the property manager was like, we should cut him a break. And I'm like, no, man, we're not cutting him a break. He can leave if he wants. There's some terms for that too. So small town though.
I side with you on that, OG. And sort of one way to source property management companies is I like the ones with the lowest online reviews because if you read them, they're typically comments from tenants saying they wouldn't let me break my lease early, or I had no one to talk to. Like there's actually good ones.
They wouldn't give me the money for the coat.
Yes,
they wouldn't refund my coat money.
Yes,
that's
100%.
That's funny. That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, you're right. The bad reviews are the target property. You want your soprano guy to be running your apartment building.
That's right.
I was late and he beat me with a hammer. Kidding.
Alan, one more question for you before we say goodbye. You mentioned property management software, right? What are some of these systems that you like? Can you mention a couple?
One I really like is called Himlane, and they focus on making it very virtual. Like they'll schedule the vendors for you. They'll communicate with the tenants to let the vendors in, and so it's more of like a concierge service. There's a bunch of free programs out there as well that people love. Obviously, you get what you pay for. But if this is going to be a business, I think sort of stepping up and spending a little bit more money up front, it's just to build the systems and have it in. I would start with Himlane all day.
All right. Tomorrow, Stacking Deeds launches. And I saw you had a tent in Mom's backyard here ready to go for the launch. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks for letting me crash here, and I've been negotiating an offer on with your mom on this house, so maybe I'll be a landlord soon, Joe.
That is probably not a great idea for you, Mom or me. Yes, Stacking Deeds coming tomorrow. That's Alan Corey. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.